So, supposing you want to apply for a PhD scholarship or a research scholarship, you will need to have a certain stage of preparation already before you apply. So please think about the subject of your research project. Also think about the international relevance. You do want to go to Germany to pursue your research, so do make sure that Germany has A, something to offer, and B, that there is an interest in your topic. Think in advance about the steps of your research. How long is it going to take you? If you are applying not for an entire PhD, but for a one-year scholarship with a PhD, for instance, at a Ukrainian university, please make clear to whoever is reading your proposal, what have you been doing so far in Ukraine? What do you plan to do in Germany? What do you plan to do when you go back to Ukraine? DAAD requires a precise time schedule for the period that you are in Germany. So if you're applying for a year, for instance, don't simply say that for 1 year you want to use this in this lab or other library. Please break it up at least in sections, I would say, of 2 months. As I said, you need to start your research already at the time you are applying in order to be able to write precisely about it. Explain your current state of research. Explain what kind of theoretical basis, what kind of theoretical approach you are using. Please also point out why you chose the approach you did choose. Usually there are several options and you need to make an argument for the approach that you're choosing. Then I printed that sort of in bold print, even though it should go without saying, please state what is your research question. What do you want to achieve with your research? It should go without saying. Most of the time you even know, but we get an amazing number of proposals where people simply forget to state it. So when we're talking about research questions, you need to have a hypothesis. And you need to have an objective, what it is that you want to find out. Also, what is the relevance? When I'm talking about relevance, I'm not only talking about practical relevance. I mean, you can have a highly theoretical research project if you are studying something, for instance, in my field, if you're studying some 18th century author, it's hard to argue that this will have an up-to-date practical relevance, and it doesn't need to have, but it needs to have an academic relevance. You should also point out what you are contributing that is new to research. Okay, some of the issues that you should consider in your research proposal and that you should address are things like data collections. Are you working with specific data? Which kind of documents do you want to analyze? Are you going to do any social surveys? And if yes, how are you going to do them? Are you going to do practical experiments? Especially when you're working with people, with animals, you may have ethical issues. If that's the case, please point out what are you going to do about them. For just about any subject, you need to address the academic literature that you are using. And please do make sure by the time you're writing your proposal that you have been working with international literature. A lot of times we're getting reading lists, quote unquote, that are purely Ukrainian. In that case, you will find it extremely hard to make an argument why you need to do research, for instance, in Germany. Please, especially with any kind of experimental work, with any kind of survey work, address how you want to evaluate your results. I was already talking about the stage of research a number of times, which is important. And in your bibliography, please include the relevant books and the relevant literature that you have been using so far and that you will be using. As you see, those are our contact details. As you see, we are funding all kinds of disciplines. We are funding projects that would be of interest to any type of research community. So with DAAD in our requirements, we are still fairly general. I would generally say if you can get a German professor, if you can get a German university interested in your research, that is enough for us. There may, and Dr. Zeumenich is going to talk about that, there may be other funding organizations that will have other requirements where you will have to address much more a societal impact, for instance, and other things. So please find out about that. And with that, I am concluding and will pass on to Dr. Zeumenich. I'm just going to leave my document sharing thing. Roxana. We see everything.
Yeah, thank you. So in fact, I kept only to very basic overview, but I hope when you have questions, I and other speakers can answer more specifically. And in addition to representing the Max Delbrück Center for Molecular Medicine, which is a center within the Helmholtz Association, I'm also representing German-Ukrainian Academic Society and UkraineNet. So there information included in the presentation. So here you can see this quote, which I included. And by the way, I work in the department which supports grants application at our institute. And this is a permanent topic that people basically start writing and only later realize how much more work it is than they think. So when should I start writing? The answer is almost always like yesterday and better already last year. I'll include. So when you are starting to think about your proposal, my suggestion is not started in the way how it will appear, so the introduction and then methods. Start thinking about it like from the end, and maybe even like reading a research paper. And when you write research paper, at least in my past experience, it was that first you think, okay, these are my data, this is what I've got from my experiments or my surveys, depending on your field. So first try to focus what are you going to do your research on, and what results you want to gain, what new things you're going to discover. And then for that, you would need to describe what methods you need to use to get those data or discoveries or basically results that you aim, and also for analysis. And only when you thought through this, you can sort of start to think context of it in a broader scientific context, why it is important to do this. Of course, it's important from the very beginning to think about that context, but don't start writing that, because usually this is more difficult. So this is just my practical suggestion. But to start with, you think what Frau Zimmermann already said, what is your research hypothesis? This is quite important to start thinking about, because quite often people start describing things, what are they going to do, because they quite well understand, but it's still not clear what is really a hypothesis and or research question. And in that respect, there's this term, don't go on a fishing expedition. You know, I know this and this methods, and if I do this and this, something will come up, because this is like not purposeful. So you have to have a question in mind, what you want to answer. You have to address aspects of what makes original what you are suggesting to do, why it is not like what everybody else is doing. Is it sufficiently novel and innovative? And it's not only natural sciences or engineering sciences, because of course science is about new things, and just repeating what everybody else is doing, it's not really science unless there is like specific funding for repetition of certain experiments. You have to think about, and it could have a different context depending on your research, what are the challenges? Because if everything is absolutely predictable, this could be like too obvious and not interesting science. On the other hand, if it's too risky, what you're proposing, maybe you plan to use a new method which was never tried in this particular field, and this makes it extremely exciting, but at the same time, it can make it risky. And it's not bad to have it risky, although you have to think for which funding scheme more or less risk is allowed or expected. But you should show that you thought through the risks or the possible risks, and you have some ideas how you would address that. And sometimes in evaluation, this really is a special commentary that a reviewer has to provide if there are contingency plans, because science is unpredictable and things can go not even wrong, but like your hypothesis might be actually disproved. And if it happens at the very beginning of your research and the whole like later steps depended on that, then it still needs to be clear what would happen. Do you have another hypothesis to test or other way of finding or measuring certain parameters that if the method you wanted to use doesn't work or whatever? So this is important just for yourself also to think. Don't worry that this would be like, oh, they will think this is so risky and one can't do it and would be negative. It's how you then present it. And you come to feasibility and credibility of the work, and these are two terms which are addressing different things. So feasibility is something, is this like doable? Does it make sense? And this is for an expert in the field or somebody with more general knowledge, because you not always or quite rarely would have real experts in exactly the field of your study, that it makes sense that you explained well enough why with these methods this can be done in principle. And credibility of your work is also like, even if it's possible to do in principle, but do you as a researcher have skills and access to necessary infrastructure or supervision or collaborations to actually get it done? So these are two different aspects of what you're proposing. And I just give here to you this mnemonic rule, CAR, which is easy to remember. What is the challenge that you want to address? What is the approach that you want to use? And what the result you expect? So if you think about your project in those terms, it might help you to nicely structure and formulate your ideas. And here I just described a little bit like a basic structure. So it's not how you write it. That's what I already said. Maybe start first, what is the main aim or goal of your research, and what research question you want to answer, and what is your hypothesis. And from that, you can formulate an objectives which you can think like specific tasks that needs to be done to achieve that goal. And this objectives, one uses also this rule, should be SMART, so specific enough, not very generic, measurable, so it's really one can one know exactly how much, how many samples, how many participants in the survey should be. So it's something that one understands, that you just don't talk in very generic terms, that it's achievable, and also in the time frame that you propose, relevant to the goal that you address, and also time bound. So it's really within that time frame you can do it. And once you formulated it, go back to thinking, describing so-called state of the art, which is what is right now in the field of your research is the situation. Don't start too generic, and don't spend too much time on this. So if you have, let's say, just for simplicity, 5 pages to describe your research, the state of the art description should be maybe 1.5 page, where you introduce the topic, explain the main trends, so the reviewer sees, okay, you know the latest literature, you understand what's going on in the field, and then you say, okay, this is all known, but this is still very poorly understood. Or if we know this, then we would better know about the process. So you have to put in the context your research question in the context of the current research. And this is not a literature review. It's not your task to really show that you read every and the latest article in the field, but it's important to have the most important literature, and to show that you are aware of what's going on internationally in your field. And then basically you go to next part, where again I would start with work plan, where according to your objectives, you describe then specific tasks. And if necessary, you then explain also specific methodology to be used to achieve answers to those objectives that you formulated. And methodology overview is a more generic, so one understands, okay, this methods you're going to use for your research. And in the work plan, you can maybe use more specific details of methods for specific objectives. Because if you start explaining in methodology some very specific things, it might be not clear why you need to go into such detail. But then later, when you explain that this is the task, this is what you're going to do, then one needs to go back to methodology to understand what method you would be using. So you can split it a little bit. And this is also where you can highlight originality. For example, part of you will be developing the method, and this method is particularly original. This is where you can also highlight it. I already mentioned risks and concerns. So again, depending on the funding agency, this could be like they want very high risk proposals, and then it's quite good that it's very risky, but it's important that you understand the depth of the risk, and that you gave a thought, what would you do if you can't access that particular equipment, then maybe there's an alternative. Or you propose to use Raman spectroscopy, which never was used for this particular sample analysis, but then maybe it wouldn't work. So maybe then there is another method that you can use to get the same answers to the question. So this is where you think about. In social sciences, it could be you plan to carry out survey in 10 regions, and then something happened that maybe your collaborators locally in some places are very reliable, and in some it's new people and they were not reliable, and then maybe you would need to focus only on 5 regions, and would not be able to do the research in all 10 regions as you planned. but then you still have to say that you still would have enough representation to make conclusions from your research. So depending on your field, this could be very different types of risk. And then, of course, you formulate what are the outcomes which should basically go back to this goal that you said that you want to achieve as in your proposal. And then you include the bibliography references also to your works that you've done. So your pilot studies, you maybe some preliminary work, which also shows that you expert in the field that you want to do. I want to mention here this slide from Human Frontier Sites program, and this is just general experience for anybody who deals with applications, that they are coming at the very last minute. And to me, it's very important to highlight to you that especially if electronic system submission doesn't work and you have some questions maybe still to clarify, don't keep it to the very last moment. And here I'll just show you as some resources. I understand you would get the presentation if you ask for it, which could be useful for you from different sources. And the advice also, depending on what scheme you apply, try to find out the guidelines, not only for the applicant, but also guidelines for the evaluators or for referees. Quite often, and the more in the future, I guess, it's always would be available because it's public money and one has to be very transparent how we fund what criteria for selection. And they sometimes are formulated in just very generic criteria, that it's excellence, it's implementation, but sometimes they are very specific. And I'll include it here, an example from Marie Curie individual fellowships, just for you to have a feeling what reviewer has to do, because I hope this would help you to understand and help you with writing your proposal when you look at it from the perspective of the evaluator, who, as it happens, has to basically fail the majority of the evaluation of the proposals. So for Marie Curie, the success rate is something like 13–15%. So it means I, as evaluator, have to fail 85% of the proposals. And this is not just I read and say, okay, this is good, this is bad. There are very specific criteria. And when you read it, just here as an example, is the proposed research methodology and approach credible in view of the type of research innovation activities proposed? So this is where you have the task to explain what you are proposing to do. This is realistic to be done. So I, as a reviewer, can say that proposed research is credible because the applicant has demonstrated that she or he has skills in the area and they have access to infrastructure and the methods proposed are adequate for the proposed tasks. Or, for example, here, and this is quite relevant for fellowship applications, where it's not only the research which is evaluated, but also its contribution to your career development. Is this, have you shown how training activities describe, are they relevant? So this is, again, quality of the training that you will be undertaking will be evaluated. But as Frau Zimmermann said, it depends very much on the scheme. So sometimes it's only research which is evaluated, and sometimes it's also how this particular fellowship will help you to progress your career. And then the actions undertaken to train you as a researcher, also to become a better scientist, but also maybe gain some other skills, would be evaluated. Impact area, this is especially important for European funding, which is far too broader for scope for DAAD application, but it's just for you to think. If they say, okay, how will the new knowledge generated by the proposal be disseminated and exploited. This is where you have to show if there would be patterns, if you plan some cooperation with maybe for industrial application, for some product development, but also if you plan outreach activities, if the knowledge that you gained in the project would be disseminated to broader audiences, if this was a study of relevance for patients, if they would be involved and inform your research, but also you would feed back to the society. And these aspects become more and more important, but I will not stop give here too much detail. I just included this as an example for you, simply that you have an idea and look for such a form, which are available on the webpage of the funding agency, or you just search in Google, and you quite often can find these forms. And I think this is really helpful for you to structure your proposal and language that the reviewer finds the answers to these questions very quickly in your writing, that it's very nicely structured, and they don't need to read many times all over again trying to answer the question. So what is especially original in your research? You have to say it, and the originality is because this and this and this, and explain it. So this is where I'll finish. I think I only this is again example for implementation, and again I just remind about timing, because this is very disappointing where you put so much effort and time, and then you still don't have time to really polish what you are writing, and the reviewer immediately sees it. You take something and you think idea is good, methods are good, but a person just lacked maybe another week to go over, and there are just omissions, or sometimes it's simply structured not so well, it's difficult to read, and this could be disappointing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Oksana.
Okay, so now I'm switching in. Hi.
Yes.
And
yes.
just I will be sharing my screen now. And let's look at it. Okay, so I will be talking a little bit from the perspective of the evaluator, and I will be coming back to DAAD applications from this more European, more general, maybe for a later stage of your career application, back to the application we are basically today talking about. So, and for this I will be taking two perspectives. One will be the perspective of the applicant. So I will try to put myself into basically your skin and try to support you with maybe some ideas which right now haven't been yet in your head, haven't moved through your head yet. And this was exactly the case with myself in that young years, and I would like to put this perspective because I think it's very important. And then I will be switching the gears and switching the sides, and I will go to the another side, and I will be telling you from my perspective, from the perspective of professor of the German university who gets lots of such applications. How can you get my attention? How can you get my interest? How can you get my support, that I really would like to support you with your application? So first of all, I would, as I thought, let's think from your perspective. And I think it's extremely important question now to ask at the very, very beginning, who would I like to become? And this is not a trivial question, because if you know the simple and straightforward answer to this question, it's very easy to develop your career. So the fastest are career developments which are straight. So if you have already now in mind very clear understanding whom you would like to become, it's extremely easy for you to plan your career in such ways that you are getting there as fast as possible. It's, however, also not bad if you don't have this idea so far, so you maybe would like to explore. Maybe you would like to go here and there and to see how is it in this academic science, how is it in the industrial science, how is it maybe in applied medical science from my point of view, and so on. This is not bad, but if you know the answer, it helps you a lot to structure your career and basically to plan your next steps. So the second will be, the second question will be, where do I stay now compared to my international peers? And this is basically a question which probably not everyone is asking, and maybe if those ones who are asking, not always answering in a right way. And from my experience with Ukrainian applicants, actually I have seen already, also with help of DAAD, very competitive applicants. I have seen competitive applicants, basically usual as everyone else. And I definitely have seen less competitive applicants. And this is because of very different reasons, access to resources and so on and so forth. However, as I already as I already mentioned, I would like to stress this, that there are many very competitive applicants. So let's think a little bit how to think about myself. How can I assess myself? How can I imagine, am I very competitive, or less competitive? So people who have already managed during their bachelor in Ukrainian university, go to Harvard, go to Tokyo, go to ETH in Zurich, those are extremely competitive, and they are so much competitive on the international levels that they really can wish themselves whatever they want, basically. There are lots of people who did lots of good things and good studies and good research proposals or research projects in their university, in their cities, and these are absolutely competitive people. So why I'm stressing this, because my feeling is that self-assessment of Ukrainian students is actually below the levels they really have. And then if it happened that really it was not possible to do lots of what you would like to do because of different technical reasons, because of laboratories and so on and so far, then maybe you, and you have more like theoretical knowledge, then maybe at this stage of your career you are less competitive. However, you do have potential. Why is this important? Because this will directly impact whom am I approaching. Because definitely if someone who cannot compete right now and only in the future will get this experience applies now to the best laboratory in the world, probably it will be difficult. But for those ones who are very competitive, I would really encourage them to apply to the best laboratories in the world, because this speed ups your career and basically allows you to go much faster towards your great aim. And this basically also the question which is directly connected to the second one: who is a good supervisor for me? So definitely there are some generic ideas who might be a good supervisor. How do I assess my supervisor? So I know someone who has published an interesting study about my area of interest, and so is he the good supervisor for me? Is he the bad supervisor for me? How can I access this? So first of all, definitely you have to have a deep interest in the research area the supervisor is working at. So area of interest is the most important. Then for sure, this young stage of your career, doing either PhD or brief postdoc stay in the foreign lab, is about techniques to be learned. So your research techniques, which have to be improved at this stage of your career. So what can the lab offer? How diverse the techniques are, how important they are, how standard they are, or maybe they are very new and very modern. Then you can also look at publication output. Why is this important? Because definitely, first of all, nowadays, and we all try, and we are talking about that we will do it different, but so far, basically your CV will be judged later in your life based on your publications. And if the publication output of the lab is high, there is high chance for you also to gain good or many publications out of your stay. And then, is your supervisor recognized by his peers? And just to give you an example, and this is an example of a colleague from Ukraine. So again, just encouraging you and telling there is nothing special. And basically, we do have good scientists all over the world. So this colleague of mine, he has basically, what we are looking at is now a Scopus, which you probably know. It's also the database which is used in Ukraine. There are different ones, but Scopus is more known, I think. And there you see basically two things. First of all, you're looking at citation index, and this is important because citation index is exactly, in my view, the metrics how your peers perceive yourself. So if other people are interested in your work, if they are citing your work, this means that the work is good. So this is a very important parameter. Then there is another parameter here, this H index to the left, and this H index basically tells us how many papers the colleague has which were cited more than H times. So this colleague has 40 papers which have been cited more than 40 times. So basically, what can we judge about this supervisor? That this is someone with broad interest, with repeatedly good output, which is recognized by his colleagues. And then there is another question, maybe, is this good for me? So the first 4 points which we discussed here was generally good supervisor. But now, which one should I choose? Should I always choose a large lab, or maybe it's better for me to go to the small lab? Do I need to choose an established scientist, which is like the first one I was talking about? Or maybe I will go just to young group leader who have just established his group? What are pros and cons there? So in the large lab, especially in the large lab of an established world-known scientist, you may have a risk to get lost. So basically, because everyone has 24/7, then maybe the time which the supervisor will spend on your project will be less because he has to supervise many good projects. Then maybe it's better to go to the small lab where you have not so many competitors for the time of your supervisor, and maybe there you will have to take more responsibilities and learn more techniques, and basically will have access to many other tasks like teaching, maybe grant writing, maybe managing the lab, which are also very valuable experiences which will help you in the future. So this is not a trivial question, and it's really worth to think which one is the best for you. It's also maybe your personal interest. You more like large groups of people and competitive environment, or maybe you would like to have basically less large amount of colleagues around you, and so on and so forth. But the general, as a rule of thumb, it will be like in a large group of established competitive supervisors. I would suggest those people who are competitive to go for that. The pros are you will get visibility much faster. So basically different doors will open in front of you much faster, and you can go basically achieve the goal of your career much faster. For those people who feel at the very moment now, I don't feel like I'm very competitive, I would really encourage to look at smaller labs, and maybe labs who are now chaired by very competitive, very successful in the past, but young investigator. And those people will really have much more time for you, will have patience to teach you, and so on and so forth. But maybe there you will not gain this visibility so quickly. And then how to approach a potential supervisor. So the DAAD page has already, and I have copied it here, basically this link where it is very nicely explained how do you approach and what do you write to a potential supervisor. So my job here will be just bring it from my perspective. So someone who gets maybe 2 or 3 applications at least per week, if not more. So first of all, please be direct. So if I am getting an application, dear sir or madam, or even worse, dear sir, I am not reading such application further for the very obvious reason. If the applicant didn't make an effort to understand whether I am sir or madam, why should I make an effort to understand what he wants? So those ones which write Dear Professor Karashuk, those ones I continue reading, but those ones who start with Sir Madam, there are 2 things to it. First of all, it's obvious that this is a serial letter, so to say. So basically, as Google says nowadays, it's a spam. So such letter have been sent to many different laboratories with very little modification. So this person is not interested in my research. And second, as I say, if there is so little effort is invested in this request, why should I invest my time and my effort? Second one, be brief and precise. As already told, everyone has lots of different things to do and is really receiving maybe 50 or 60, this is my usual day, pensum emails per day of different messages. So it's very difficult for us, and all of us becoming, you know, like very short in reading, so to say. We can't read long texts anymore. So one has to be brief and precise and formulate what you want in a very crisp way. The same story is be clear. So please formulate rather soon after, so, hello, I'm this and that. What do you want? What are you asking for? Don't expect that someone will be reading maybe a big long abstract a paragraph like for 10, 20 sentences before they understand what you want. And also, please be clean in your language. And as you know, there is a beautiful Ukrainian originally startup, which is now Grammarly. So use Grammarly. Grammarly is really very helpful to clean up your language, that your language is also brisk and precise. And be neutral. So sometimes, and with my background, I'm very often getting the letters like at the very end it stays, oh, but if you wish we can speak in Russian. So these things basically coming very close to me, and don't ask me what do I think after 7 years of war about speaking Russian. But this is definitely something which is maybe not reasonable to do in the very first letter. And then how to approach a potential supervisor. So you have to state your interests. So the first thing I would like to see in such letter, why are you writing to me? Why would you like to join my lab? And to answer this question, you have to show that you really are your interests coincide with my interests, my scientific interests, that you maybe have read, and this I really would encourage you to do, have read a few, at least the most known papers of your potential supervisor, so that you really do know what they work at, and you explain in a brief sentences why is it important and why would you like to learn this technique, this approach, study this question, so on. Then the second message which have to show up immediately in the email is what is your strength. And this can be different. I offer here a few possibilities which you can address or pinch on. Maybe you know some techniques which are very interesting, exactly fitting to what lab is doing. Or maybe you're a dedicated, hardworking person, which is definitely you are, otherwise why would you be applying for this position? And so on and so far. But your strength has to come over rather quickly, that people continue being interested in your letter. Then your vision of your future. So who would you like to become? What exactly are you asking for? Again, are you asking for a PhD training? Are you asking for a brief stay in the lab because you have an exciting project where you just have done already everything, and the small piece of evidence which is lacking can be done with techniques, for example, offered in this lab? Are you asking for a collaboration? Are you asking for the support for the grant application, as in this case? But this has to come rather soon and to be very clear. And then please attach your CV already. So the first letter I would suggest is coming with CV, because this is very important for the supervisor or potential supervisor, people you approach, to understand who are you actually. And this CV is also has to be specific. So in there, I'm also expecting you to tell me about your skills, about knowledge you have had acquired so far, about your lab maybe exchanges, where you have been. Have you been to Harvard? Have you been to Tokyo? Have you been to another city? Have you established maybe already some collaborations, and so on and so far? I am not in the first place, but interested in your civil engagement, because definitely, and this is my experience, people who are good, they are also good in many things. So usually they are doing more than one thing, but this is already maybe nice to have, it should be there. And then what I'm least interested at is in your hobbies. So if you write, I would like to play piano, this may be a plus point, because someone playing piano, I would say, or I would judge, is a hardworking person, and this is what I'm interested at. But if you are saying, oh, I would like cooking, this is kind of a spam. I don't really care whether you like cooking or not. So this, I do believe, is everything I have prepared. So thank you so much. And I'm returning back to Dr. Zimmerman.
To switch myself on. Thank you very much, both of you. I think we got a lot of different perspectives now, and we're open to questions. Oops, I see we have, oops, excuse me, I see we have a few questions already in the chat.